6.5. Nevertheless, Smith claimed the documents were written in Reformed Egyptian, an otherwise unknown script. Church member Martin Harris took a sample of the original writing to New York scholar Charles Anthon. After the meeting, Harris returned to the early church, claiming that Anthon considered the translation to be real, but changed his mind when told an angel was involved. Anthon supposedly identified the writing as shorthand Egyptian. Harris was sufficiently inspired to mortgage his home, getting divorced in the process, and remained a sincere Mormon despite intense criticism. Unfortunately, Harris' claims do not match what Anthon wrote in an 1834 letter. Some years ago, a plain and apparently simple-hearted farmer called upon me with a note from Dr. Mitchell of our city, now deceased, requesting me to decipher, if possible, a paper which the farmer would hand me, and which Dr. M. confessed he had been unable to understand. Upon examining the paper in question, I soon came to the conclusion that it was all a trick, perhaps a hoax. I began to regard it as part of a scheme to cheat the farmer of his money, and I communicated my suspicions to him, warning him to beware of rogues. He requested an opinion from me in writing, which of course I declined giving, and he then took his leave carrying the paper with him. This paper was in fact a singular scrawl. It consisted of all kinds of crooked characters disposed in columns, and had evidently been prepared by some person who had before him at the time a book containing various alphabets. Greek and Hebrew letters, crosses and flourishes, Roman letters inverted or placed sideways, were arranged in perpendicular columns, and the whole ended in a rude delineation of a circle divided into various compartments, decked with various strange marks, and evidently copied after the Mexican calendar given by Humboldt, but copied in such a way as not to betray the source whence it was derived. I am thus particular as to the contents of the paper, inasmuch as I have frequently conversed with my friends of the subject, since the Mormonite excitement began, and well remember that the paper contained anything else but Egyptian hieroglyphics. Anthon, a professor at Columbia College in New York City, and was fluent in English, Greek, Latin, German, and French, amended his comments in an 1841 letter, saying he did write a note to Harris, but was adamant the writing was fraudulent. Harris requested me to give him my opinion in writing about the paper which he had shown to me. I did so without hesitation, partly for the man's sake, and partly to let the individual behind the curtain see that his trick was discovered. The import of what I wrote was, as far as I can now recollect, simply this, that the marks in the paper appeared to be merely an imitation of various alphabetical characters, and had, in my opinion, no meaning at all connected with them. Some scholars argue today that Anthon was not as dismissive. However, one thing is abundantly true. In 1828, when Harris first saw Anthon, no one could read Egyptian. Hieroglyphics had not been translated yet. Nor could anyone in the church explain why ancient Jews wrote in a strange language rather than in Hebrew, their native tongue. Harris was a prosperous farmer in Palmyra, New York. He believed in ghosts, neighbors reported, and was among the first 50 people to follow Smith. He funded the printing of the Book of Mormon and Smith's lifestyle, ending up impoverished. He also claimed to have seen the golden tablets. He signed the Book of Mormon as a witness to the tablets, but admitted to Anthon he could not look at the plates or he and his family would be cursed. Actually, no one but Smith saw the tablets, which were locked up and then returned to angels once the translation was completed. Regardless, none of that is a mistake. Maybe everything Smith said is accurate and Reformed Egyptian existed. The real mistake can be found in the text that resulted from Smith's translation. The Church recognizes 4 sacred books. 1. The King James Version of the Bible. 2. Book of Mormon. Another Testament of Jesus Christ. 3. Doctrine and Covenants. A compilation of revelations and writings from the early Church. 4. Pearl of Great Price. A selection of Smith's revelations, translations, and writings. The Book of Mormon remains at the center of the religion's faith. Faithful Latter-day Saints rate it on par with the Bible. It recounts the story of Mormon, an American prophet who supposedly amassed the records of an ancient North American civilization. The account was engraved in Reformed Egyptian on the golden plates buried by Mormon's son Moroni. Returning as an angel, Moroni chose to reveal the plates to Smith, who translated them and published the results in book form in 1830. What story did the plates tell? The account is complex, following a group of Hebrews who traveled from Jerusalem around 600 BCE to North America under the leadership of a prophet named Lehi. In what is now New York, they split into two groups, the Lamanites and the Nephites. The former left their religion and eventually became known as the American Indians. They eventually overran the Nephites and destroyed them around 400 CE. However, according to the text, Jesus visited the Nephites prior to his ascension to heaven and taught them. Questions were raised immediately after the Book of Mormon was published. Supposedly, the Nephites built great cities in North America. Nothing has ever been found. Nor is there evidence that anyone visited this continent in such numbers. That is not a serious problem. Lack of evidence does not mean absence of evidence. Perhaps someday, something will be found of a lost civilization. Moreover, the golden tablets, which supposedly held the sacred words, would have weighed 200 pounds and could not be easily picked up and moved as Smith insisted. The bigger concern comes from the claim that the refugees are linked to the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Historically, under King David's grandson, the ancient land of Judea split into two groups. Judah in the south with 2 tribes and Israel to the north with 10 tribes. Jews living in Israel were overrun by Assyrians around 722 BCE and became lost in popular thought since Judah survived to be the ancestors of Jews and Judaism. While the term lost tribes remains popular, it has no historical significance. Historians are well aware that the members of the northern tribes were either killed, enslaved, assimilated, or fled, the common fate of any residents whose land was conquered. Recently, genetics has linked the ancient refugees to a modern African tribe, the Lembo, who have a tradition that their forefathers were Jewish and fled from the north. The Latter-day Saints became associated with the lost tribes of Israel through several ways. The term appears in the sacred text. 13. And it shall come to pass that the Jews shall have the words of the Nephites, and the Nephites shall have the words of the Jews. And the Nephites and the Jews shall have the words of the lost tribes of Israel. And the lost tribes of Israel shall have the words of the Nephites and the Jews. 2. Nephi. In addition, the 10th Mormon Article of Faith states, "We believe in the literal gathering of Israel and in the restoration of the 10 tribes, that Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be built upon the American continent." Orson Pratt, one of Smith's 12 apostles and the oldest survivor of them, wrote, "From many intimations of ancient prophecy, the 10 lost tribes evidently had a highway made for them in the midst of the Arctic Ocean, and were led to a land in the neighborhood of the North Pole." Also, according to the Church, converts to the Latter-day Saints brought the idea with them. Smith certainly knew of the concept, which was commonplace in upstate New York, but the idea did not sit well with scholars. For example, Constantin Samuel Rafinesque, a French-born botanist, attacked the LDS for singular but absurd opinion that American tribes are descended from the Hebrews or the 10 lost tribes. Atlantic Journal and Friend of Knowledge, Vol. 1, 1833. Rafinesque's objections arose from his own then controversial claims that natives were of Asian descent and were widespread when Europeans arrived. Nevertheless, when the church was founded in 1830, lots of people believed the idea that American Indians somehow were connected to those missing tribes. The belief grew from a Christian concern that America was not included in the biblical text. As such, they asked, how could the residents be under God? by claiming that Native Americans were actually refugees from the Old World, linked the two, and provided a religiously accepted explanation for the Indian population. That issue was papered over in the 1950s when the Pledge of Allegiance was amended to include those words. One nation under God. On the other hand, more importantly, modern DNA studies have proven conclusively that the American Indians are related to Asians as Raphael-esque proposed. A 2012 genetic study found that Native Americans came to North America in 3 separate migrations, all from Asia. Studies in 2015 linked some of the natives to Siberia. They have no connection to the ancient Middle East, the 10 lost tribes or Jews in any way. This information would not have been known to Smith or anyone else until late in the 20th century. In Smith's day, scholars continually tried to connect the Indians to the ancient Israelites. For many years, they searched in vain for linguistic or archaeological evidence. The theory petered out long before DNA destroyed any shred of the proposal's credibility. Nevertheless, it still lives on in the Book of Mormon, the seminal work of Joseph Smith, Jr., and the central belief of the religion he founded.